thank you for coming out. This is great. I'm so pleased with this turnout, and we appreciate your support. I'm Andrew MacArthur, Trout Unlimited Southwestern Vermont chapter president. I've been at it for 3 months, so this is great. You're making me look really good, so I appreciate that. We have a great team. Many of them are here tonight, and they're just integral in what we do. They're good people, they're passionate people, and they work really hard, and I appreciate them. What's cool about tonight is that we're bringing different organizations, different entities together that work on our local watersheds, and hearing about the collaborative process and the challenges and the successes that we experience along the way. So these are the professionals in the field, and I want to thank Bill Hespy for putting this all together. He's been busting his tail putting this together. And I'm going to pass torch to Bill, and he'll take it from here. I'm going to be working the slides and trying to keep on track. Don't give me too much to do. Did you have anything?
I was combined with Aaron.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
And I want to reiterate what Andrew said. Thank you all for coming. I think it's really exciting for us as a community to come back together after a couple of years sort of away. And the calendar says it's springtime. The snow on the fields may say otherwise, but we're all going to be out on the water if we haven't been already sometime soon. And what better way to sort of anticipate the season than to learn about what goes into keeping the waters cold and clean and, if you like, the mountains green. So with that, we've got really an expert panel with us that, as Andrew said, are in these local waters, and I think you're going to learn a lot about what's going on and what's important, hopefully a little bit about what you can do to help contribute to this very righteous cause. With that, what I'd like to do is just introduce each of the members of the panel and then let them say a word or two on what they're working on right now. And we'll just start to my left with Jacob Fetterman. Jacob is project coordinator for TU, working on the Battenkill Home Rivers initiative. So over to you, Jacob.
Hi, as Bill said, I'm Jacob Fetterman. I work for Trout Unlimited. I'm now officially the New York project coordinator, but I head up the Battenkill Home Rivers initiative, and I've been in that role for 3 years, or coming on 3 years. And most of my focus is stream restoration, but we do a lot of monitoring involved in kind of assessing where the need is for restoration projects. And we have some reconnection projects coming down the pipeline, which will be some of what we talk about tonight.
Great, thank you. To Jacob's left is Karina Daly, who's a restoration ecologist for the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and also happens to be the chair of the Vermont Dam Task Force. So, Karina, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you. So good to see so many faces in person. And yes, I work for Vermont Natural Resources Council. We're a nonprofit environmental advocacy group in Montpelier. So I'm a lobbyist at the State House part-time and work on water policy. And then I manage Vermont's dam removal program, or VNRC's dam removal program, and chair the Vermont Dam Task Force. And we also have a website called Free Vermont Rivers, and that's sort of an initiative to reconnect rivers. And I've got a bunch of dam removals in this area, well, Rutland County specifically, but happy to dive into those more later.
Thanks, Karina.
Yeah.
Austin, to Karina's left is Austin Gallinet. He's a fishery scientist for the Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, I'm Austin Gallinet. I started with Vermont Fish and Wildlife as a fisheries biologist about 7 months ago, so I'm still really new. Before that, I was in Sacramento. I was working on Chinook salmon escapement surveys and juvenile immigration, so I was kind of trying to capture the whole life cycle on a couple of rivers out in Sacramento with Chinook salmon. I'm happy to be somewhere a little less hot, a a little less dry, so I'm very happy to be in Vermont. What I'll be working on, I'm part of the District 2 region, and so my boundaries, our main office is out of Rutland. So I work on the Otter Creek watershed, I'll be working on the Meadowee River watershed, and then down here, the Hudson and Hoosick River watersheds. The Battenkill is not in my jurisdiction, that's District 1, but I'm happy to help out with all those surveys. What I'll be doing is I'll be taking a deep dive at our district's trout waters. And we're going to do really an intensive survey on all of our waters, see where the population has come from like over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So that's my plans. My big project is focusing on the trout streams.
Thank you, Austin. And to Austin's left is Dr. Aaron Rogers, project coordinator for Trout Unlimited.
Hi everyone. So I actually started with Trout Unlimited about 10 years ago part-time and then 7 years full-time. So I've done a lot of different project works. My coverage area is, pretty much the entirety of Vermont and then down into western Massachusetts. And then more and more I've been kind of drafted into some projects over in Maine, over into the Finger Lakes region of New York. So lots of different projects in lots of different areas. I love doing dams. They're a lot easier than culverts because you don't have to put anything back in place. And otherwise, a lot of habitat work, which would be a lovely topic for another night.
Thank you, Aaron. And the last member of our panel, Phil McGovern. Phil's a stream restoration specialist for TU.
Hi, everybody. I started here at TU 2 years ago, originally running SAW for Aaron, all over, from Maine to Massachusetts and everywhere with, in between, and slowly have worked myself up to stream restoration specialist, so now I get to hang out with big yellow machines a little bit more of the days in the summertime, so thanks you all for coming here.
Thanks, Phil. Well, why don't we get into it? And I should have said at the outset, we want this to be interactive, if possible. I mean, we've got some slides and we've prepared some materials, but if there are questions or areas that you'd want to explore some more, just chime in. I think the whole panel is totally up for that kind of a dialogue. So maybe just to kick it off, the first broad topic that we wanted to cover was dams, culverts, and the watershed. Why we care and what we can do. I thought this might be a good, Austin, you might kick this off just to provide a fisheries scientist perspective on why we care about this.
Yeah, so coming from a fisheries perspective, I had a lot of questions, where to start. And the first thing was, with aquatic organism passage, why are these fish moving? What's the point? And so I kind of was able to boil it down to two primary categories. We have fish and their daily movements, and then life history strategies. So to start with daily movements, a lot of our salmonids in Vermont are going to have home ranges that they like to stay in. They'll move a lot within these home ranges throughout the year. Some will be for foraging, others will be to find cold water refuge. In areas where pooling takes place, water temperatures can increase substantially, and we all know that hot water is not great for fish, so they'll be moving around to find cold water refuge. And then the last one I could think of was to avoid threats. And so threats could be predation, avian like eagles, osprey, heron. It could be aquatic predators or aquatic mammals like mink, otters. And then the angler. I know for a fact that I am a threat because every time I try to go fish, I can't catch anything, so they must have moved away, right? And then, so moving in from daily, we get into the more serious, I guess let's say the life history strategies that these fish have evolved. And one of the main ones is the spawning migrations that these fish can take. This is a big driver of movement of these fishes. I'm sure, as all of you know, the Chinook salmon, or just general salmon and steelhead, they make these huge, magnificent runs. They can run hundreds of miles from the ocean into the streams. Our salmonids don't quite run like that, but they follow a similar pattern. And that's why passage is so important, is because they like to move out of these lower areas where they've kind of been a lot of human interaction, a lot of deforestation, loss of riparian vegetation, not as cold of water, not as clean a substrate. They try to move up into these headwaters where we have all of this habitat. And this habitat is really good for starting reds, incubation, oxygen, water flow. And then after hatching this water, there's less predators, there's more woody cover. It's great for juvenile rearing. So after you start thinking about why these fish are moving, then you can start to get into some of these barriers that we've been seeing. And the two primary barriers that we see are improper culvert construction and dams. And they really inhibit these fish's passage. And as we just talked about, like, this habitat up in these headwater streams is just so great for the success of these spawning, successful spawning. And so to place this barrier and eliminate this fish passage can be detrimental to some of our fisheries. And then one other thing that these barriers do, it's the spring and fall pulse flows. A lot of these fish have these triggers. So when the pulse flows, these big storms happen in the spring, we get all this snow melt. So when all this water comes running down, it's a great trigger for the juvenile fish that are already up in the headwaters that have overwintered to move on out. They want to stop competing with all those other juveniles. They want to find their own home ranges, and they want to start growing until they're ready to come up and spawn again. And then our fall water events, that's just a trigger for these fish to want to go up and spawn. It's great. It brings cold water. It brings a lot of water. Most important habitat for a fish is water. Without any water, we can't have any fish. So they move on upstream and they start their spawning efforts. And I guess with that, we can kind of move into some of the, and please feel free to stop me if you have any questions or anything. I could talk about this.
Austin, I know we're going to touch on sort of dam removal 101 a little bit later, but Karina, I was just to set that up perhaps, but what does it take to restore a stream that has had some ill-positioned dams or culverts?
Yeah. So it's really it's great to hear the different perspectives, because Austin's thinking fish, trout, and I'm thinking watershed scale, thinking about our rivers as intact connected systems. And there's been this history of fragmentation in our rivers in Vermont, and as a result, with that fragmentation, we have warming water, because when water is blocked from moving downstream, it warms up the temperature and reduces the dissolved oxygen, the turbidity, and you have basically a lake-like system versus a river system. So in removing dams, I'm thinking about restoring Vermont's cold water systems and thinking about just what's behind that system. So we want to restore natural stream processes, which is restoring that turbidity, that sediment, natural sediment transport, the movement of aquatic organisms and their nutrients up and down that system. That's a healthy river system. It moves, it changes, it's dynamic. And when you take out a dam, there's 200, can be 200 years of sediment that's built up behind that barrier. So that barrier basically has been there for a couple hundred years, and there's a tremendous amount of sediment that's behind that. We can't take the dam out and release all that sediment at once, so there's sort of a phased approach, and often we have to truck sediment off-site and slowly breach the dam. But, so, yeah, a different perspective on it.
Thank you. Aaron, I don't know if you could perhaps share a little bit of a TU perspective in this sort of general question?
So I think one of the interesting things that membership often brings up, and anglers in general often bring up, is there are plenty of people who see that dams still have a use actually in aquatic blockage. So where we've got certain invasive species moving up into certain rivers, or mixing of native and non-native species. And at this point, kind of the TU side of this, as well as, a lot of our supporting partners from Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service, is, the important thing is to be opening up the habitat, is to be improving the water quality, the water temperature. All of that needs to come first. And, just make the entire system, as Karina was saying, take it on a system-wide perspective and make the system as good condition as we can, and, kind of set that as the building block for everything else that has to come after. And yeah, so it's important for the fish, it's important for the sediment transport, and then it's only after that can take place that we really start to look at the rest of the in-stream habitat pieces and kind of building out the best systems that we can.
Thank you. Jacob, maybe just bring it local and the bat and kill and kind of how your work in the bat and kill kind of relates to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to kind of point out some of the also difficulties with dam removal. So a lot of times, like we all know, in Manchester there's a dam right in town at the traffic circle, and that dam is likely to never come out. It has significant historical value. Everyone that lives in Manchester is used to seeing it, and so a lot of times when we remove dams, there's also the community and historical aspect involved too. So it could make them more difficult. Do you want to jump in? Sorry.
No. He's so correct.
Just that heavy sigh
Just that
there.
heavy sigh. And I think that we need to change our thinking about history, because before the dam, there was a river, and that river flowed freely for the past 10,000 years. And in our short history of, industrial civilization, we had that dam, and that is a really important piece of history, and it's beautiful, and people love the sound of the waterfall and the stone, but there's something to be said for a connected system and a cold water fishery. So I value both, and Vermont doesn't have a lot of great natural ponds, so I am not for taking out every dam in the state. We have to make our choices, but it's understanding the consequences of those choices.
What about the safety of an old dam like that though too? As we get more intense storms, higher frequency storms, that thing can be a danger to the town too. And you gotta pitch that end of it to maybe some of these, I love the old dam is not so, when you get an Irene or something blow through town.
Right, yeah. And then that brings opportunity to us in those cases, especially where there's the historical or community ties to it.
Does someone do maintenance on that thing now or not?
I think that they do occasional maintenance. Not probably what it needs, but
Yeah. It very much depends on who owns the dam. Most of the dams in the state are privately owned. So it is entirely up to the dam owner to perform any and all maintenance on it. And there is the dam safety agency, so that they provide some kind of review, but they don't have any regulatory power at this point to enforce maintenance or upkeep of dams.
Maybe we should just jump right into it. I know, Aaron, you have some slides on dam removal 101 and that type of thing. If we want to talk a little bit about, like, what does it take to remove a dam?
Is this the right slide?
No. The other one. There you
It
go.
has your name on it, I should
Yeah.
have known that.
So do you,
Yeah, just,
okay. So if we're gonna do the dam 101, we'll go through this, and then we can always talk
Does that
about
work?
specific projects later.
yeah.
I think this works. Ha-ha!
Yeah, I thought we'd do like a 101 and then we drill into some
Sure.
examples.
All right.
Well, that's good.
So, oh no, giving it away.
Nobody saw anything.
No one saw anything. So I kind of made a as condensed flow chart as possible for kind of the larger full process of dam removal, starting with finding the dams. There are plenty of state databases that have dams listed upon them. That is by no means all the dams that are actually out there. And Karina and I have both kind of started working on using citizen science to find what we are calling ghost dams. They're not on anybody's radar, nobody really knows that they're there, and they are still just haunting our state's rivers. And oftentimes, those are the ones that are privately owned, old homestead dams, old mill dams, often very out of the way. so that if you are ever out fishing and walking along a stream or a trail or anything and you come across a dam, take a picture of it. Just write, take a GPS point on your phone or like drop a pin on Google Maps, and you can feel free to send it to me, to Jacob, to Karina, and if it's not a dam that we know about, it's really good that we start finding these. Then once we know, the dams that are out there, we prioritize them, which ones are going to be, reasonable to take out, which ones are going to be issues, either, historic value or a landowner that doesn't want to take them out, which happens quite a bit. We do a lot of landowner outreach. Jacob's been really good about that. Knocking on a lot of doors is often the way to go, and just starting that conversation in a very direct way. We do site visits with state agency, with landowners, with community members who are interested. And then kind of depending on, TU has design and in-house capacity for, taking out dams. So we'll go out and do the topographic surveys and the field work and stuff like that. Other organizations that don't have that capacity will go out and hire an engineer at that point, and they'll collect all that data. And then there's a really long period of engineering and design restoration, and that kind of ties in with all the permitting, because all the reviewing agencies can absolutely give comments back, and then there are design changes, and then there are more comments, and there are the design changes. And it can go back and forth quite a bit. Once you get to a certain extent, then you can start looking at contractors. The dam removal is a very short piece of all of this. At that point, you're monitoring, you're replanting the site, and then you're out finding more dams again. So really, that process looks a lot more like this, and that there's a lot that goes into a dam removal that no one will ever see except for the person managing the project. And the team that has to put up with me dealing with all of these things. And then all the unknowns, because you never know sometimes what you're going to find. One dam removal, not done by me, by the Connecticut River Conservancy, took out one dam only to find a historic timber crib dam underneath that they had not known about, and then had to go through an entire secondary dam removal process to get that one out as well. So, and of course, amongst all of this, there's that fun fundraising piece. Dams, while less expensive than culverts, are still not cheap to take out. And construction costs have only really gone up the last few years, so it's a process.
Thanks, Aaron. I know, Karina, you've spent a lot of time in this space as well. Anything you'd like to highlight or add?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to just how we are working to prioritize dams in the state. And that is sort of the ecological benefit of their removal. And there's a number of ingredients that go into that piece, but how many river miles are we opening up is one of them. How is it a headwater dam? That could be really significant from a temperature perspective as far as spring seeps contributing to the watershed. And then it's the hazard classification rating. So if that dam is on the Vermont state inventory, it has a hazard classification rating, and if there's a significant hazard, then that's a liability and a public safety hazard. So that plays a part in the piece as well. And then it's, often if we don't have the landowner's support, then we can't remove the dam, whether it's the most important dam to remove ecologically or not. So obviously that's a huge factor. And then the partners. I think the more people who support the project, the better, the stronger the project, and the faster it's going to move through the process. So certainly we need a lot of partners at this process, and we really try and start that early on in the process as well. So yeah, those are my key points.
Thanks, Karina. Why don't we talk about a few projects to make this real? Jacob, maybe I can start with you in the Mary Hollow project that we're working on.
Yeah, so actually to start off a little more broadly, for the Bat and Kill, we did a full inventory of all the road stream crossings. So in order to build that database from which you could prioritize projects, you actually need someone to go out and collect the data, because all the towns, state, county that puts in the crossings, they don't upload it for us to have that information. So we have field crews go out and actually take measurements of each of the crossings, and then from that it goes into either the Vermont State Database, or there's a collaborative for the North Atlantic region that also has a similar database, which then actually gives each crossing a ranking as far as the passability for trout and other aquatic organisms. So it's not just limited to trout. But then we take that data and we're able to run various metrics like Karina was talking about, the miles reconnected, the habitat value, whether or not there's actually trout in that stream, and then we could get it down to a list of maybe like 20 culverts or dams if we're prioritizing dams. And then from that we look at the land ownership and all of those other metrics to see which ones we actually want to go and do the surveys, designs, further monitoring before we actually move a project forward. Am I after this, I think?
You're somewhere after that.
A little bit after.
I
Go
guess.
through until you find it.
So one of the big ones that came up as we went through this process was on Murray Hollow Brook, which flows from its headwaters in Vermont down through and actually flows into the Baden Kill in New York. And for everyone that may or may not know, Murray Hollow Brook, it's a very cold water stream. It doesn't really get over about 65 degrees in the summer, so it's excellent for trout. And there's a large number, great population of brook trout within the stream. And there's really one problem culvert, and it's this one that's just into Vermont as you would travel up Murray Hollow Road along the stream. And it's just an improperly sized culvert, and that leads to high flow velocity through the pipe, and under low flows there's a pretty significant free fall into the scour pool down below. And so by replacing that with a full channel spanning structure, so one that could actually handle what would be like the annual high flow event, it won't create a scour pool down below the structure, and ideally would have a natural stream bed throughout it, so that then even trickling down through to like the macroinvertebrates and smaller fish species that are in the stream, they can easily make it through the structure as well. And then there's other projects too. We've done surveys on Baldwin Brook, which is in Sandgate, and there's a few culverts along that stream that are the same thing. It's just improperly sized structures that end up creating drops, scour pools, and I mean, for a lot of anglers, you know that scour pools end up holding a lot of trout. And so that's another thing to consider, is that, well, while you might have a lot of fish in the scour pool, imagine how many more you would have in the stream if they're able to spread out and disperse. You aren't really eliminating that one habitat for them, you're just giving them more range to spread out and inhabit. And then also combined with this project, it's 5.5 miles of upstream habitat, and part of the plan for restoration here is to actually do strategic wood additions upstream. So we would not only connect habitat, but we would make the habitat that they gain access to better.
So Jacob, for culverts which go under roads typically, is there funding available from the state or the federal government? Because a culvert like that at some point may blow out in a high water event. So, you know, then obviously people wind up being isolated and you got all sorts of problems there. It just, because of those potential consequences, is there a broader pool of funding available to you? Or is that not the case?
There's definitely state and federal sources, both. As far as like a more emergency relief, like there are things that come up if that would be the case that it washed out in a big flood, and especially if it damaged downstream
They're trying
properties
to
and
prevent that,
infrastructure.
though, so it's, you know,
Yeah.
obviously,
There's not really preventative unless, do you know of anything?
There are
spend 5
some,
times more when it becomes an emergency rather than
yeah.
5 times less and do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a few FEMA funds that can address pre-hazard mitigation, but based on, you know, thousands and thousands of culverts that we've surveyed, something like 50 to 60% of all culverts that are in the ground are undersized and barriers to problems and barriers and potential flood hazards. So that there's a lot of structures to address. They can be incredibly competitive, and a lot of the times those kind of FEMA-based pre-hazard mitigation funds have to be applied for by towns, and towns often don't have a lot of capacity for, you know, going through a grant program and administering it and following all the rules and things like that. So we try and help as much as we can, but there is still a lot of burden on the town to, you know, get the funding to do this, and we do what we can, source through a lot of federal funds, some state funds that are available to nonprofit organizations, private foundations, things like that. So I don't think I have ever had a single project that was paid for by just one grant. It's usually like 4 or 5 grants all pulled together to really have the funding to do culvert replacements, to do dam removals, to do habitat work.
Thanks, Aaron. You know, Austin, I was thinking as Jacob said what many of us know, that, you know, those scour pool areas really do hold quite a few trout. But how should we think about it, right? Because because yes, they're right there, but in terms of the fishery more generally, and you made some of these comments earlier, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Right. Well, I also see this is a great spot for us to access the river for our stream surveys too, right? But then you see these fish get held up in this pool, and you all know the saying, like shooting fish in a barrel means something's real easy to take care of. Predator finds out, a mink or an otter finds out about this hole here. It's easy pickings for some terrestrial predators: eagles, heron, osprey. And then there's also the competition aspect, which sometimes, you know, you have your tailwater fisheries that are created from dams, which can help stir up some sediment, some inverts, and that can happen in places like this too, where you can support a larger population of these fish because of like this little tailwater. But then again, you bring up competition, you can only hold so many fish here, you bring in predators, and they can easily pick out some of these fish. So it'd be great to open this up and let these fish run.
Thanks, Austin.
I know you have to do surveys and designs and stuff, but what kind of a cost is a replacement culvert on a job like this?
They've gone up a lot since COVID.
40, 50,000 or more?
I would love.
What's a dam removal then?
Our last 2 dam removals last summer were 80 and 90,000, and that was basically a 5-foot and a 7-foot, 8-foot dam. So not even terribly big ones.
With no pollutant sediment?
Yeah.
That's cheap. Mine
yeah.
was 400,000.
Because we spent, when I was in Connecticut, we spent like $500,000 removing the sediment because it had PCBs and crap in it.
Yep.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Aaron,
So-
maybe you want to talk a little bit about a couple of those Dorset dam removals.
Yeah, so I think just eyeballing it, I mean, it's nice because it's a gravel road, there's not a lot of fill over top, but even this would likely be around 250,000.
Nailed it. Right, isn't that what it is?
I was gonna say, isn't that,
That
you guys
was
for a
our
quote?
estimate last year, so I mean,
It might
even
be
since
more.
then, yeah.
Yeah, it might be more. That's including your engineering.
No, that's just construction, that doesn't
That's
include engineering.
Because your engineers are going to take a chunk of that too.
And that's why we've actually moved a lot of ours in-house, because we can do it for substantially cheaper than a private
Do you
firm
have
can.
PE then that does it?
But, yes, so they're always way more cost than we want there to be.
So we're currently raising money for this.
Yes.
And Jacob, do you know where we're at with that?
Well, we have some funding for the actual implementation of the project, but we also have secured enough to do that design, engineering, permitting that gets us to the point where it's really shovel ready and then it's much, well, not, I won't say much easier and jinx myself, but at that point then it's like we go to a funder and say, this project is ready to go, all we need is X amount, and it could happen this year. So that's our goal at this point, is for this year to get it to the point where we get to winter and those applications going in for the final funding that's needed to reconnect 5 miles of habitat.
So if you got a little money laying around, we'd happily help you spend it. And thank you, Jacob. We should touch base soon about that and how we did.
Maybe a couple of projects that have been completed.
Yeah. Want to just take it all the way back to the beginning? So I'm not flipping through with this.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You're faster. All right, so some of the projects that we've taken care of on the Meadowy, and this actually started, 8 years ago. I did this first site visit when I was very pregnant, and now my daughter is 7. So that's how I measure this project in timelines. We identified 6 barriers along this stretch, and the 2 that are highlighted there are actually 2 barriers that we found while doing a stream walk with the Southwest Vermont chapter. So when we do these kinds of projects, when we start identifying barriers and kind of priority areas, we love to do the stream walks, find those things that we don't know about before we start addressing problems, so that they can really be kind of considered as a big whole. So the first one that we did all the way upstream was on Tower Road. Right, that's not working anymore, so one go forward.
Okay,
So Tower Road, we did that one in 2017. So again, lovely undersized culvert there with, I think that was about a 3-foot drop down to the stream channel bed. Replaced it with a concrete structure. So it's basically a bridge. It's, I think, technically called a 3-sided concrete box, but ostensibly acting as a bridge. There is no bottom through there, or no constructed bottom through there, so it is just natural stream channel all the way through. And so that, just upstream of there, it goes right up into the Green Mountain National Forest. And that connected, I want to say 2.5, 3 miles from that project. And so next. The next project down that we addressed also in 2017 was another culvert on Pastures Lane, which was a privately owned road. So next. And here we're starting to get pretty big on the Meadowy, and yet that is still only, I think that's about a 6-foot culvert. So the Meadowy there is, over 20-foot wide bank full, and being crunched down through a 6-foot wide culvert creates a lot of forced velocity through that one little bottleneck, and that creates a really big scour pool, which the downstream landowners, his sons, really like to go swimming in. So we had to apologize for taking away their lovely scour pool, but we got them a lovely bridge instead. And I think it's a lot better for fish passage, for the views, for pretty much everything throughout that area. So next. And then so skip ahead 5 years, because that's how long some of these projects take, especially when there's a pandemic. So the Reynolds Dam, the downstream-most barrier here, you can do next. So in the before picture, when we originally came across this dam, we were like, oh, well, there's obviously a dam there. After a high water event, back where you see that red arrow, we discovered that there's actually a second dam that is exactly the same as the first dam, just 50 feet back. It was entirely buried in sediment when we first came across it, so we didn't know it was there, and that, of course, changes your entire design plan, which was a fun little adventure. But we took that out this year, and you can kind of see we dewatered as best we can, basically diverting the stream, and luckily we had a really nice floodplain off to the right side on the pictures. So we could basically divert all of that back and around so that we could work largely in the dry. It didn't last the entire time, but long enough that we could place a couple of stone grade controls, so basically stone steps that are buried in the sediment. And now it's nice and free-flowing all through there. So also last year was taking out the Wallace Dam as well. You can go next. And this one was an interesting one because the main channel does this fun double 90-degree turn. That all behind the dam, so that straight line you can kind of see behind the tree line, that's actually the dam structure. So there's one main spillway and then over 150 feet of abutment that ran either side of that spillway. So it kind of had to pass all the way along the backside of that. That whole area behind the dam used to be an open reservoir. It obviously all filled in with gravel, created a nice bar where we now had some really nicely established trees, most of which were left during the construction. And so what you can't really see is on the channel, on the river left side, there is an old overflow channel. So that was like a flood chute, basically. And since the river right side was the kind of historic spillway, the landowners really wanted to keep that, really wanted to make sure that that was not going to be touched. So our compromise was basically opening up the old flood chute and the spillway, or not the spillway, but the flood chute, and basically redirecting a lot of the flow through that area. Which meant we had to do a bunch of channel work and kind of habitat work to kind of help that along and make it nicer river habitat. So you can go next. So this is, okay, so a little bit better of the kind of river left and river right. River left is the old flood chute, river right being the historic spillway. You can go next. And then, so this was taking out that flood chute, or opening up that flood chute, looking downstream from the dam, looking upstream from, or where the dam formerly was. And so it's a little bit narrowed in through the flood chute still, but that will kind of fill in with naturally mobilizing sediment and kind of create a nicer bankful through there. Next. The before and after removals, looking way nicer, I think. I can go ahead. And then so coming up this year, we've got our final barrier on Sugar House Lane, which is also privately owned, and you can go next. And this is a fun one because it defies a lot of definition. It is a bridge that somebody poured a concrete sill underneath. So now there is a large concrete block that is acting like a dam, but it's not really classified as a dam, so we can't get a lot of dam funding, but it's also not a culvert, so we can't get culvert funding. So this one has been saved for last, just for sheer lack of funds, but we're finally all square, and so this will all be coming out this year. The sill, the dam, the center column there, and we'll be replacing it with a nice channel spanning bridge, and some nice habitat work to go with that.
Aaron, do you want to share, if you can, some fun facts just on approximate cost for any or all of these projects?
So Tower Road, Tower Road was $400,000. Pastures Lane was $280. Reynolds Dam was $80. Wallace Dam was $90, and this one will be around $220, something like that. And that's just for the construction costs. That doesn't account for any of the project management, monitoring, engineering that went into all of that.
And when this
And when this one is out, we will have a fully connected Meadowy River from the headwaters in the Green Mountain all the way down to Lake Champlain. So that is why this is absolutely worth it.
Karina, do you want to do a little show and tell on Rutland County and some of the dams you've been working on?
Yeah. Do we have people from Rutland County in the audience? I'm curious. Oh, good. A couple of you. Yeah. Yep. Keep going. Keep going. Yep. We can stop here and I'll just mention this is a slide that I use just to talk about restoring natural stream processes and what a barrier does and how the temperature changes with that barrier and the sediment that builds up behind that. We kind of talked about that, so keep going. And we talked about project selection. And, okay, so this is the first dam, Dunkley Pond Dam in the city of Rutland, right downtown on Tenny Brook. And if you're driving up Route 7, you can stop and see this sign on the sidewalk, looking up Tenny Brook at where the dam was removed. And this dam has a great story because it was basically, there's a couple of townhouse condo complexes in that neighborhood that had to evacuate over the course of 8 times during flood high water events for public safety. So this dam really checks the public safety box as far as removal. And the mayor came out in support of it, the whole city was in support of it, the fire chief was relieved. But it also is actually a really great brook trout fishery right in downtown Rutland. So it's restoring fish passage as well. And what's cool about this dam is that it was used as a sawmill, a tannery, an ice pond, a hockey rink, a swimming pond, and now it's a free-flowing river again. So this sign just tells that story. And that one was $300,000 for construction costs. And yep, the next one, is Pelletier Dam in Castleton. This is on North Breton Brook. This opened up 37 miles of habitat upstream. So it's right at the it's right above the confluence of North Breton Brook to the Castleton River. And big brown trout holding in there. That's my husband, caught a brown trout. Those are my kids casting before the dam removal. And I think the next slide shows, so yeah, there's the dam in March, last March, and there's the restored river, the reconnected river. And we planted trees. Aaron and TU helped us do some post-assisted post-assisted log jams. And it's a great story, and it's a good project. This one was $500,000. So, and then there's one more that's yep, right there. So this summer, this is out to bid right now for contractors. This is Connolly Pond Dam in Shrewsbury. So this is high up headwater earthen dam, big old earthen dam. These were built in the 1950s. They were supported by USDA and NRCS for water ponds, for irrigation or fire ponds. And this is a beautiful brook trout fishery. This is a tributary to the Mill River, which then goes into Otter Creek. And so we had to do an emergency drawdown because this dam was failing. There was water was seeping out of the earthen dam, and there's actually properties, houses downstream. So in 2021, we did an emergency drawdown, and this is the beautiful wetland that's underneath that pond. And you can see the tributary, which the flow is going to change once we actually remove the earthen dam itself. But there are a series of spring seeps just coming in off of this property right here naturally anyway. So this is going to be a fun one. And this one is estimated to cost $210, I believe. And it's reduced cost because we're actually not taking any sediment off-site. So we're taking the earthen dam and basically putting it back where it was taken from on the landscape, because we can actually see with LiDAR and old imagery where it was excavated and built, and putting it back. So yeah, and then we have a bunch of other ones in the hopper. Another one in Shrewsbury, one in West Rutland, Youngs Brook Dam. We have one in Hubbardton, Austin Pond, and so there's a lot in this area. There's a shortage of watershed organizations in this area to take on these projects, so I end up driving south a lot for dam removal projects in Rutland County specifically, Addison County as well.
Thanks, Karina.
Yeah.
Phil, I know you've got some things going on in the Utley Brook. If you want to say a few words on what's going on up there.
Yeah, well, thanks. We're going to be doing some work up there in Utley Brook. We're moving a sand pile for the town of Landgrove, and as part of that, we're gonna restore the old wetland there. And slowly moving down the watershed, we're going to do a bunch of bank stabilization throughout the corridor, and also add some, fish habitat, try to make the flow a little bit more dynamic. And, as part of that, we're proposing to possibly do some monitoring at the top and the bottom to show the difference that our work's doing, and trying to reduce the turbidity. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's still pretty new. We're still like talking and feeling it all out.
We're in the design phase.
We're still early. Yeah, we're not quite at the implementation phase, so it feels weird, trying to tell you guys, because it's still in the works, So, but yeah.
Well, thanks,
That's
Phil. One of the things that I was wondering, I don't know if you want to, is that, yep, that's actually your picture, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is actually Wallace Dam that we worked on this past year.
Phil is also our drone pilot.
One of the drone pilots. But yeah, so this is the project, just to kind of give you guys a bird's eye view of it. The purple are our strategic wood additions, which are more traditionally known and used in the area, where you're kind of completely spanning the stream channel. We're sharpening the ends and gripping it back into the bank to try to secure it so it doesn't really shift at high flow events. They're really effective in kind of seeding the river and kind of letting the river do what it wants with the wood. And then further down, you can kind of see that's our main project area. And then this is the flood chute where the first orange box is, and we put about, 3, maybe 4 BDAs in there.
Beaver Dam analogs.
Beaver Dam analogs, yeah. So they're essentially, there's a few different types, but they're kind of like the strategic wood, only a little bit more meticulous in where you want this sediment to kind of catch, and where it's not letting the river necessarily tell you what it wants to do. You're kind of asking it nicely to let it stay there for a little while. They're not a long-term solution. We kind of say 3 to 5 years, and then maybe they'll either be completely buried or they'll blow out and sediment will kind of move further down the stream into possibly another structure that we put in. And the yellow pentagons there at the bottom, or the top I guess, are some POWs we put in, some post-assisted log structures, and those are trying to kind of deflect the flow, and essentially we're trying to eat that riverbank away to kind of make those two hard 90s kind of more straight. So it's doing what we hoped it would do. This was let's see, the 24th, so we had about a half an inch of rain on snow. So this is pretty much bank full through here. So this is a pretty good event to kind of document. So just figured you guys would want to see it from the bird's eye view. You can see the amount of flow that's moving through that new channel versus the old channel. And yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions or want to discuss that stuff. Yeah.
And in this instance, you used the BDAs for a specific reason below the dam site?
Yeah, to try to, so the grade between the old abutment and where it reconnects to the corridor was pretty steep. And we wanted to try to mellow that grade out. So by putting in that temporary, I don't know, what are we calling it? It's soft infrastructure or something. It was able to catch that sediment and kind of mellowed out the stream corridor for us. So good point, Jacob. Thanks.
Yeah. I also wanted to highlight, I was out one day during construction and helping Aaron and Phil. The partnerships that Karina talked about were significant on this project. They had an email chain going with the Conservation District, Karina, I think you were on it, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife. So there was a lot of partners involved in that project, which made it a great success.
Maybe we can go off script a little bit, because that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and we could do a whole other sort of series on it, but just like, how do we get everyone to sort of play nice together?
Well, I think it's honestly, in my opinion, it's relatively easy because we all want the same thing. Like all of us up here, we're working towards the same goal. While sometimes we might be competing for the same sources of money, I don't think that we ever really look at it that way, or at least I don't. It's what can we do to make as many projects happen as we can, and if we're able to bring multiple sources of funding to the same project, then that's even better.
Are there any state roadblocks that you run into? Because you've got lots of different agencies involved. You know, I've talked about this a little bit, Jacob. I won't go into specifics, but, you know, I see a lot of work being done here in Stream, which is great. I mean, so is there a watershed basin plan here where they're allowing this sort of stuff to be done in this stream? You know, is there a consistent application of, you know, how things are being done across the state? Or is there any roadblocks depending on who you're working with?
It definitely does vary by region, both in terms of like Vermont, like Agency of Natural Resource, river engineers, fish and wildlife bios, all that fun stuff. But yeah, like what Jacob said is true. Everybody's kind of working to the same purpose. And really, I think Wallace Dam is a good example of building trust between agencies and organizations over time. Because we would not have been able to do this 5 years ago. I have worked on a lot of different people and a lot of different projects to get them to a place where they are comfortable with, okay, we can try it. We can try it here, and then we're going to monitor it like nobody's business, and, you know, so long as nothing goes wrong, you know, we can do it again, or we can do a different version of this. And so far, the state agencies have been really impressed, and not just state, but the federal agencies. So we always have to work with Army Corps of Engineers on all these projects as well, because we're moving dirt, and that's what they like to keep tabs on. So it's been a long time coming, and hopefully we'll be able to do more and more of this, not just in this district region, but across other regions as well where we're doing work.
And I guess I would just add that I think the sooner you get everyone at the table involved with the project, especially the regulators, the better. Because if they want to be invited to the conversation so that they can weigh in on the design process as it goes forward. Historic preservation can be a big hiccup, but so far I think compared to other states, so I've heard, Vermont is a state that's very amenable to restoration projects. I'll just say, like, as far as everyone being at the same table, I think we are, but a lot of the communities that I've been working in, not everyone is in support of dam removal, and how do you get that support at the community level? And I think it's a community visioning and values mapping. It goes back to, like, what do you guys want? Like, what do you want in your community? Do you want clean water? Do you want healthy rivers? And like understanding the science behind that and what that looks like is sometimes just people don't understand that. It's complicated, like it's a very dynamic system. So, you know, backing up that far to educate people about that and then ask them what they want. And often I've had a lot of success with that in places where they're attached to their pond and or their dam and the sound of the waterfall.
Yeah, a good example that we've been working on for a long time and will continue to work on is the Williams Dam in Londonderry, so the one that's just under Route 11 as you're going through town there. That is a high hazard dam. It has a lot of issues with it that while the state can't enforce anything to happen to it now, the town is very serious about looking into, well, what do we do with it? How do we address this? And there are plenty of people in town who would like to see it taken out and remove that hazard and all the insurance issues that go with it. And there are plenty of people who are very attached to that pond and very attached to the historic aspects of that dam. And they are still exploring their options at this point. And so it will just be a continuing conversation. And as organizations, that's pretty much all we can do in some cases, is just continue to have that conversation, address everybody's concerns as they come up, sometimes multiple times, and just kind of wait until there is something like consensus.
Aaron, maybe that's a convenient segue to, what can we as as volunteers, if you like, what can we do as a community to help these causes? How can the audience become involved in these matters?
There's a lot to be said for, public advocacy of, it doesn't have to come from organizations or from the state. If there is a dam that is in your town and publicly owned that, you have opinions about, you can absolutely go to a select board meeting and, kind of propose, well, what is the town doing about this? Don't they know, there are ecological issues that are created by these structures, and, there are people in town who would like to see the town take action on that. And it might not be an immediate yes, but it at least starts the conversation.
But a politician's tour, have you guys done those in any of these projects? Taking your governors, your state reps, your congresspeople out to sites and say, here's a frickin' problem. What are we gonna do here? We need your help.
We have not done that yet. We've definitely reached out in other ways, but I think that's I think that can be very beneficial.
It can be hard depending on which politician.
It's finding the right people to go to the site and making sure you don't get chased off the site.
Yeah.
But we as volunteers and advocates, unattached to political organizations or whatever, we have the right to say, call Senator, kid come out next Saturday or July, whatever. Give them a chance to schedule it, get them out there.
Well, who knows? Maybe they'll be watching.
And, a pitch like this, what has been done, is great because they see you got a group here that's doing something. They're always looking for that.
And state senators can be surprisingly, have really good leverage sometimes. Not in Vermont, but on projects down in Massachusetts that I was working on. We had kind of hit a snag in the permitting, and it was just taking a really long time to kind of move things forward. And someone from the town select board knew, was neighbors to their state rep or their state senator, and got in touch with him, and he got in touch with one of the committees that he's on in the state, and that committee got in touch with the permitting agency, and all of a sudden I got a call that, things have moved forward. We can progress with the next stage of the project. So it can sometimes take all kinds.
That's something to answer your question. I think we can do. It's just where do we start? Yeah. And we need to educate ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Make contacts with these folks.
And this is such a broad and rich topic, and as the panelists in a pre-session said, we could spend a weekend, a few days drilling down into the complexities of all of this, and there's other aspects that we really haven't even touched on in any significant way. And we certainly, speaking with Andrew and the rest of the members of the chapters board, is we want this to be an ongoing dialogue. So this is maybe not the first conversation that we're hosting, but it's part of a longer series that we envision to get into this more and to educate ourselves and the community on what's happening and what we can do.
So my question is there any resource for citizens to become educated about what kind of the hot spots, the priorities are, to just be able to become aware, so that if there is any citizen action that would support it, we could be aware of that? I mean, this has been terrific, really illuminating, but and we got to look around in our town and see what's going on. But it would be great if there was a resource where we could learn a little more.
Yeah, so you can join the Vermont Dam Task Force. It's open to any and all. We don't have, we don't allow outside consultants that might be, fishing for jobs as a result of it. But otherwise, it's open to anyone who is interested, citizens. And we meet every other month. Either it's hybrid, so you can come in person to Montpelier or you can come via Zoom. And there's a lot of educational resources, and it's so that's one platform. We have our Free Vermont Rivers website. If you just Google freevermontrivers.org, and there's a lot of information on that website. So that's another landing place for resources. But
I'm curious. I owned a business in Connecticut that was a landmark property and had a fairly, about 16-foot high, 100-foot long dam on a small trout stream. And one of the issues is, have you guys ever decided to split the difference? And so I was trying to figure out how to address the dam. And the discussion led towards fish ladders. And so rather than whether you can remove, whether there's money to remove, I haven't heard anything yet, or whether you're approaching some of these, whether it's the landowners or projects that, you only have so much money to go around, to put in fish ladders, because then you can get the spawning run in. You can also, there was a discussion about diverting some of it from a top flow to a tailwater to let some of it, because it was about it was a mill pond. So some of these hybrid solutions, rather than remove it or not, the fish ladders, the conversions to tailwaters, are you guys doing any of that?
So the state river engineers in particular, who kind of oversee and regulate the stream alteration permits, they're not huge fans of adding in fish ladders. Fish ladders are not as effective as we would like them to be. And they require a lot of maintenance to make sure that they're functioning properly and that they are clear of debris that's going to create more blockages and barriers and things like that. There are a few around the state. They always seem to be a bit of a hassle, the ones that I know, but they are all built on those historic landmark properties where absolutely that dam is not moving, and so it was the compromise at the time that worked for everyone. So I mean, they are around, but they are very few and far between, just because unless there is an undue burden as to why the dam cannot be removed, then the Vermont river agencies aren't really gonna support it where the dam could feasibly be removed.
And I would say there have been a lot of alternative methods evaluated, right? So you've seen the salmon chute, they launched the salmon over the dam. There's spillways, we've even seen some low head dams, which, I mean, it's only maybe a 6-inch foot, 18-inch clearance. So there are some trout species that would be able to get up a fish ladder, or a low head dam, or a spillway. But there are so many other species in the water that we need to be concerned with. All of our minnows, they aren't acrobatic enough. They aren't strong enough to swim up a fish ladder or a spillway. Same with our suckers and our eels. So there's a lot of other considerations to take into account when it comes to alternative methods versus fully removing a dam or providing AOP at culvert sites.
Are there any, we're talking about cold water fisheries here, basically trout. In Vermont, or anywhere in the Northeast, are there any dams on warm water rivers? And you apply the same observations and criticisms to those? Where the root isn't, but I guess it's not just fish, it's other smaller critters.
Yeah, well, I would say they're harder to fund, those warm water fisheries, because we don't have the trout. Our buckets of funding are basically public safety, FEMA bucket, clean water, water quality, and fish passage. There's sort of 3 buckets, and some dams check all those boxes, and some are more, focused on FEMA. Or I have a project, Austin Pond is above Lake Bomazene. That dam is failing. It's over 200 years old. The landowners can't afford to fix it. It's a matter of time. But it's a warm water fishery. It's Austin Pond, which doesn't have public access, but it's one that's just stalled for that reason. And I think it's a big concern to Lake Bomazene, which I think the first step would be just a feasibility study to say, look what could happen here, and actually maybe that could improve water quality for Lake Bomazene and oxygen and turbidity, and so that's an example of a warm water fishery. But yeah, some of those ponds that have been ponds for a long time aren't cold water fisheries anymore.
Do you have enough data yet to say on average how many with temperature you're dropping streams by, and for what distance downstream how much impact that has? Or is that just not too specific to each site?
It's generally too
It varies.
specific to each site, depending on the groundwater inputs.
Yeah.
Are we in the general?
Yeah.
Follow up on that. All of the stories you told us and the pictures you showed, these are wonderful examples of rewilding, if you will, using that term. But do these projects have explicit or specific goals? Is your purpose sediment dynamics, riparian habitats for bird species? Is it to grow more fish, or so on? So do you explicitly have a goal for these things? And more importantly, do you do post-project evaluation to see if you attain those goals?
Yes, and.
What does that mean?
So at least how I focus my work, and of course everybody can kind of, works on their own kind of, moral compass. I take a very ecological approach. So I take a yes and. So even though I am Trout Unlimited and I am technically doing this for the trout, I am doing it for the sediment because the sediment transport is going to build the spawning beds. I'm doing it for the invertebrates because it's the prey. I'm doing it for the water quality, the water temperature. When we are doing riparian plantings, we are looking at, we only use native species. We try and build in habitat that's going to be good for native pollinators, local birds, migrating birds. More and more of our project sites that are around really good floodplains and old ag fields, we're looking out for wood turtles and salamanders and other, semi-aquatic species that are using similar kinds of habitats. So we're looking at all of these co-benefits and, having that very inclusive approach. And for as much as possible, we do monitoring. There's not a lot of funding for monitoring. So that's always the really hard part of it. When largely our goal is, aquatic organism passage writ large, so long as nobody is putting a dam back in its place, we are almost always accomplishing that goal. But we do, especially around rock steps and grade controls, we do keep an eye on those, monitor those, make sure that those are not becoming, rock steps that are going to become barriers as well if we've somehow missized things. And we can always go back in and change or alter if needed, but so far we haven't had to do that yet, which is pretty nice.
One possibility, and each funder is different, but if you build into the budget, when you make a grant application to a funding agency, whether it's governmental or private sector, build right into the budget, 5% extra for post-project evaluation. If you want more trout, find out how many you had before, and now you have budget to go back and see how many you have after, size distribution, or the geomorphology, whatever. So building it into the project before you do the work has been shown to be one good way to potentially do that, because as Jacob and I have talked about oftentimes, if you can get the good data that says, we did this, and here's the result 5-10 years later, it's a great tool for raising more money in the future because you can prove it worked. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. The limiting factor there is a lot of grants, more and more, are one-year timelines.
Yeah.
I have funding for 1 year, and at the end of that 1 year, anything I haven't spent goes right on back. So I would love to monitor for 10 years, 5 years, and I have not yet seen a 5-year grant timeline that I can work within.
You know, maybe in the last few minutes, you know, we can just ask the panel, you know, what's on the horizon? What are you working on? And we talked about some of those kinds of things here, but is there anything else that, you know, you want to make this community aware of that you're particularly interested in or focused on in the coming year or 2 or 3? Jacob, let's just start with you.
Well, I think the point that Michael brought up is good. The monitoring is something that I think we're all interested in, and we do want to show those positive benefits beyond maybe what we currently have the capacity to do. It's just a matter of finding out how we make it happen, because with my background in biology and fisheries management, that's something I've been most interested in. And until I came into this position where it's more restoration focused, like that's where my heart and soul is. So that's something that motivates me to try to find sources of funding that would allow that to happen. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the easiest thing, because the focus of Trout Unlimited is to get projects done on the ground. So we do work with the state agencies where possible to do the population monitoring. So like the Murray Hollow project site already has 2 years of pre-reconnection data. So thanks to Courtney Buckley, which is one of Austin's counterparts, we actually have some of that data. And then after the project, hopefully we do see what we expect and want to see, is that there's a much better, healthier population of brook trout, both downstream and upstream.
Great, thanks. Karina?
Yeah, well, so you saw my dam removal, one of my dam removal projects for this summer. There's a couple other ones that may or may not go through. I guess in addition to the dam removal piece is VNRC has a Healthy Waters campaign, and we have introduced 3 bills, the State House right now. We're hoping at least 2 of them get taken up. But H29 is a river corridor bill, which is just that concept of allowing our rivers the space they need to move and giving them that space in the river corridor. So thinking about that intact river system from the headwaters to Lake Champlain or to the Hudson or to the Connecticut River, depending on where you are in the state. We also have a Resilient Rivers Commission, which is H374, which is the concept of protecting our riparian buffers, so providing natural vegetation along our rivers for fish habitat, for cold water. And then we have H31, I think, is our wetlands bill. So a lot of our rivers start in headwater, groundwater seeps that are wetlands, and connecting those wetlands to our rivers is really important. And so our wetlands bill is a proposed net gain of wetlands, so making up for the long history of wetland loss in our state and our country. So this is requiring a 2-to-1 wetland mitigation ratio for our wetlands. So those are 3 bills that we've introduced this year that we're working on and hope to move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A question for you. You mentioned river corridor. Is that the 100-year floodplain you're talking about, or is that channel, or what is it?
So it's based on stream geomorphic assessments that have been done through the state. So these are our main river systems, so the bigger river systems, and it includes the 100-year floodplain, but in some places it could include more than that. So there's 50 feet off of that. If you have ledge on one side, it wouldn't go beyond that ledge. So, and that is a layer that you can turn on with the ANR Atlas in Vermont, and you can turn on that river corridor. So all our river corridors are currently mapped, but they only have jurisdiction if you're working with Act 250 or Act 248. Some towns have adopted those standards, but there's no...
So there's a line on a map that defines.
Exactly. And those lines would be updated regularly as rivers change. So it's that belt width, that meander corridor.
Austin, for you?
And as for me, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I'm really in Rutland and Bennington counties. I'm really going to hammer down some of these trout surveys, get a good evaluation of these trout populations and what they've been doing recently. And then coming to something like this has been great. I've met so many new people. I've heard so much of this work that's been done, and I really want to help contribute any way I can to some of maybe the long-term monitoring that some of these grants won't cover. I think there's tremendous utility in something like that.
If you could share when you're doing those monitoring, the shocking, I'm assuming you're talking about.
Absolutely.
You know, I've done a lot of them, and I think a lot of people here enjoy doing that sort of stuff. So if you need the sort of manpower, because it is pretty laborious.
That's for sure.
So you know, let the chapters know when it's being done, and then people can get out there, and whether it's running fish from a live well down to the stream bank, or netting fish, or doing whatever you may need, any sort of ancillary help that you can use to make it more effective for you. People love getting in the water and helping with that.
Absolutely. Good opportunity for any fly anglers to figure out where the fish are lying.
Aaron, what are you looking at in the future?
So Sugar House Lane and Utley Brook, we both talked about already. Aside from that, in this area, we've been working on, there is Broadbrook Dam down in Pownell, which is just a little shy of the border of Massachusetts, a tributary to the North Branch of the Hoosick. So we've been working on a design for that one to get that one to come out. That would connect 20.5 miles upstream of there. And upstream of the dam is all Forest Service land, so it's protected into perpetuity, which is always a big plus for us. What else in this region? Outside of this region, I've got 2 culvert replacements up in the Nulhegan watershed, just outside of Island Pond. Bank erosion projects, and then it seems to be that projects are always kind of cyclical, and since we finished probably 4 construction projects last year, we're getting more into our design phase, and then we'll kind of build back up into more construction projects. But we've got a couple of other dams, one in Whitingham that's on the East Branch North River, which is a tributary to the Deerfield, that we'll be working on the design for that. And Binney Brook, that is also a tributary to the Deerfield up in Wilmington. So mostly design projects, a couple of construction here and there, and a whole lot of habitat work in between.
Phil, anything more that you'd like to add? I know you're working on a lot of
What
the...
did you discuss with me?
That you're allowed to talk about?
I'm just making sure I can talk about it.
He's doing all the design work, so I just
Oh,
all
boy.
his work for this year.
Watch out with the guy with the drone.
No, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of different sites. So I think Green River maybe is another one that I think we discussed it, but that's in the local area.
Yeah. Green River over in Sandgate, where there's a large failing bank that will be doing a partial burn removal to kind of help provide more floodplain and less direct velocity at the failing bank.
Great. Since we're at the tail end of the session, any other questions, comments, things folks would like to share? Okay.
I have a comment.
Okay.
And an announcement, and then I'll let you take it home. This form has information about our events that are coming up. I'm sure I forgot about something, but there's more information online about all of this, so please connect with us. You don't have to be a member to get involved. If you want our emails, but you don't want to go through the process of signing up, I'd love for you to sign up, but communication, I think, is going to be our greatest tool, and just getting together on these projects and communicating, having those casual conversations about conservation in our communities is going to go a long way to supporting this stuff. Just reach out via email or message on Instagram or Facebook, whatever you feel comfortable with. The website doesn't get as much work because we're not connecting with a lot of people there, so just email works as well. If you want emails, I can sign you up. So we hope to see you at these events, and I think this conversation is going to inform a follow-up conversation we have amongst ourselves at a board level about how we can support that after project monitoring in more organized fashion. I think that's something volunteers can help with. If the funding's not there and it takes a walk in the woods, maybe that's something we can help with some citizen science. Maybe we can get that app set up in some capacity. So I appreciate everyone for coming out tonight, and I really appreciate the panelists for helping us understand these issues.